Hey everybody. So in this video, we are going to go over the PowerPoint on reference entries. So in the previous lesson in this week's module, we had sort of just a basic introduction to APA format. And we talked about the design elements of APA format that make it a little different from other formats that you might use. We also talked a little bit about how we incorporate our source information and give credit to our sources. But one of the design elements that we mentioned was the references page. And we learned sort of what the references page sort of is, what it contains, and we learned some of the formatting rules about the reference page. We also learned, that obviously the references list is a list of all the sources that you have incorporated in some way in the essay. And we learned that the reference entries match up with how you cite each source in the essay. Those rules for formatting the page itself, we learned that you have the word references centered at the top of the page. And then on the very next line of text, you start your first entry. We learned that the whole page is double spaced, just like the rest of the essay, but with no extra spaces anywhere. We learned that the references are listed alphabetically based on the first word of each entry. We learned that any entry that takes up more than one line of text gets what we call a hanging indent. So we talked a lot about how to format the page itself. And we even looked at an example when we looked at the sample APA essay. What we didn't really talk about, though, was how to actually create the reference entries themselves. You want to make sure that the whole page is formatted the right way, but it's super important to make sure that each individual entry is also formatted the right way. First of all, you simply want to make sure that you are complying with the rules of APA format. Second of all, we learned that, one of the reasons we even provide the reference entry is so that our readers can find that source on our list, and then they have all the information they need to go find the source itself if they would like to read it on their own. So making sure that everything is there in the entry the way it's supposed to be helps our reader. But for you, one of the most important reasons to make sure that you have your entries formatted correctly is so that you can be sure that what you're putting in the parentheses for your citations in the body of the essay are correct. You remember I had said in that lesson, one of my big pieces of advice was create the reference entries first. That way, when you start typing the essay, anytime you start using information from one of your sources, you can go right back to that entry you've already created and see what comes first in the entry so that you know what to put in the parentheses. Now, there is a whole other lesson coming up after this one on just citations. So we're going to take a closer look at that. But right now, we're going to look at how to make sure the reference entries are correct, right? So let me share my screen. All right. Let's get back up here. All right. And again, I'm not going to put it in presentation mode because we are going to be moving around a little bit. So what we have here, it looks like a really lengthy PowerPoint presentation, 31 slides long, yikes. But you'll see that some of these slides, why there are so many of them. We even have some practice slides at the end. So here we have reference entries, a guide to creating proper reference entries in APA format. That's what we want, right? All right, so we learned what the references page is. It's a list of every source that you have used or cited in the essay. Any source that's used or cited in the essay must appear on the references page. Any source that's listed on the references page must be used/cited at least once in the essay. That's what you're telling us. When you put a source on your references page, you're telling us that you used information from that source somewhere in the essay. If you didn't, then that source does not belong on your list. Where is it? We know it's located at the end of the essay. We know it begins on a new page, and it still gets a page number in the top right corner of the header. And we learned that even if your essay concludes at the top of, say, page 7, and it's just a few sentences, you have all that white space after it, you still go to the next page to start your references. That white space remains on page 7. The references page will start on page 8. We learned why we have one, right? Why it's important to have a references page. It's helpful to the reader, it's helpful to you, and it just makes sure that you're complying with APA format. But most importantly, it's helpful to you. Secondary to that, it's helpful to the reader. Very close second, right? So, many basic elements of reference entries are similar regardless of the type of source you're using. If you have an author, the author's last name is going to come first. And the majority of sources do have an author. So you can always kind of count on that, regardless if it's a journal, if it's a YouTube video, if it's a web page. If it has an author, the author's name will begin the reference entry, last name first. And then there's some, and then the date will always come next. And then title. And if it's an article, it'll be the title of the article and then the title of the journal. Page numbers, if applicable. If it's an online source, it will always end with the URL for that source. So there are a lot of common elements, but there are some slight differences depending on what type of source you're using. And there are really 3 different categories of sources that we would probably end up using: textual works, audiovisual media, and online media. So let's take a look at what would fall under each of those categories, the most common sources. So textual works. This is, like think of a textbook, textual. It could be online, but it's still textual. It's written information. So journal articles, magazine articles, newspaper articles, blog posts or blog comments, a book or an ebook, a religious work, a chapter in an edited book, a dictionary entry, a Wikipedia entry, a report by a government agency, a conference presentation, anything from a database, right? Those are textual works. We also have audiovisual media, artwork. You might not think that you would need to cite artwork, but you do. Clip art or stock images, film and television, a musical score, a podcast, PowerPoint and lecture notes, a radio broadcast, a TED Talk, and a YouTube video, right? So audio, visual, things that we see and hear. And then there's online media. And this would be online media that wouldn't fall under the category of a textual work that is found online. So this is things like social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, any kind of online forum like Reddit, TikTok, Twitter, and then a page on a website, right? Or a whole website, not an article on a website, but a page within a website. So for instance, if you're looking at an article from the New York Times, that falls under textual work, right? Even though you're looking at it online. But if you're looking at a section of WebMD, that falls under page on a website. So you do kind of have to be careful which one you're using. The good news is that the differences in how you create the entries aren't going to be that different. So if you get them mixed up, it might not be the end of the world, right? But try to do your best to keep it separated. What would be considered an online textual work versus what would be considered online media. Okay. All right, so again, while each source is going to have subtle formatting differences, there's still some common information that you're going to need, that you're going to use every time you create a reference entry. The author, if known. Keep in mind, we'll see this here as we go through some example entries, an organization can be the author, right? So you can have something, a source that is written by, where the author would be considered to be like the World Health Organization, right? The American Psychological Association. It's the organization is the author. You're going to need the date of publication if known. You're going to need any kind of titles associated with that source. And if it's an online or electronic source, you're going to need the full URL. So those are just some things that you can sort of anticipate needing, no matter what kind of source it is. You're always going to need that kind of basic information, no matter what. So let's look at some templates and examples for some commonly used sources, right? So first, books. Easy, right? Nowadays, honestly, most students, very rarely do I see actual books on the references page for their research papers. Occasionally an ebook, but it's not very common anymore. Let's face it, you're on a time constraint with this research paper on top of all the other classes you have and work and life and just, unless it's a book you've already read about your topic, you're not likely going to have time to read a whole book that you could use as a source for your paper. But maybe there is a book you've read in the past, or maybe there's a textbook that you have recently, used where you could draw some information to use in your paper. But more than likely, most of your sources are going to be articles and web pages and possibly like YouTube videos and podcasts, maybe TED Talks. All right, but let's see how we would create an entry for a book. So if it is a print book, meaning one that you can hold in your hands and turn the pages up, this is the template right here. And when I say template, I want you to think of it almost like a formula, where you see the formula and you just plug in information in the correct spot. So if you think of like a mathematical formula, let's, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. That's the formula. You take the number that corresponds to A and put that there. The number that corresponds to B, put it there, right? A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Then you can figure it out. A template is very much the same thing. We know where each piece of information is supposed to go, and we simply plug it in. So when we have a print book, the first thing we're going to fill in is the author's last name, right? Followed by a comma, and then the author's first initial, followed by a period. Then, if it's given, the author's middle initial, followed by a period. If the middle initial is not there, then it's just the author's last name and first initial, right? After that, the next part of the formula comes in parentheses, and it is the date of publication and then a period after that last parenthesis. The date of publication might just be a year if you're dealing with a journal article, or even an online source. Sometimes they will give the exact date that the article was posted or the blog was posted even. Then you would do the month and the date and then the year. After the date of publication, we have the title of the book in italics. If there is more than one edition of that book, then you put that in parentheses after the title. And make sure that the title is in italics. But that's it. And then the last piece of information in the formula is the publisher, followed by a period. We don't have to know where it was published, just the company that published it. So underneath that template, I have an example, right? So in our example, our author's name is R.M. Sapolsky. So we know to start our entry with the author's last name, followed by a comma. So Sapolsky, comma. First initial, period, middle initial, period. Date of publication in parentheses, followed by a period. Title of the book in italics. Behave, the biology of humans at our best and worst. Notice that only the first word and then the first word after the colon are capitalized. Normally, when we would type out this title, all of the main words would be capitalized. Humans, our best, worst, those would all get capitalized. But in APA format, when you type out a title, only the first word gets capitalized, and then because there's a colon here, this word gets capitalized, but the rest aren't. But so we have the title in italics, followed by a period, and then the publisher, Penguin Books, followed by a period. So all I had to do was simply look at my source information, all of that sort of common information I know I'm going to need, author, date, title, all that good stuff. And then I just plug it into the formula where it's supposed to go. If we're dealing with an ebook, right, you have the same exact formula, except at the end, you have to put the full URL or DOI. DOI stands for Digital Object Identifier. You'll know if the ebook you're using has one of those or not, or if it's a journal article. You'll know, it'll show you either up towards the title, usually up towards the title, up somewhere near the top. They make it pretty obvious if that source has a DOI, and it will tell you what it is, and then that's what you use. Most of the time, though, you just go up to your browser's URL window where the website address gets typed into, and you copy the whole thing, right? So for instance, if I'm looking at an article on WebMD, I don't put here just WebMD. You have to put the whole URL, because every time you click on a new page of something, it's going to be a whole different URL up in that browser window. And we're going to look a little more at that. But that's the only difference between a print book and an ebook, is just tacking on that URL at the end. Right. So what if we have a book with two authors? We're going to use the same format in the beginning in terms of names, but we're going to put commas between the authors. So still author's last name, comma, first initial, period, middle initial, period, comma, and then the next author's last name, comma, first initial, period, middle initial, period, right? And if it's only two authors, we just put the ampersand in between them, the symbol for and, right? and list them in the order that they appear. Don't alphabetize those authors, right? So you can see here in this example, L comes before S in the alphabet, but because this author's name was listed first on the source, that's what gets listed first in the entry. We don't change the order, right? You can see, the first author's last name, first initial, comma, ampersand, second author's last name, comma, first initial, period. And then the rest is exactly the same. Date of publication, title, publisher, and then this one happened to be an ebook, so the URL. If you have many, many authors, if a source has 20 or less authors, you list them all, just like that, in the order that they appear, right? So you can see on this example, this author's name starts with a W. If we were going to alphabetize this list of authors, this person would come towards the end. But because their name is listed first in the source, it gets listed first in the entry. But you can see, first author's last name, comma, first initial period, comma, next author's last name, comma, first initial period, comma. Whew, it's a lot. But you might actually come across sources, especially if you're using any kind of medical journals or publications. It is very possible that you will come across an article that does have more than 2 authors. So you do at least need to know how to do this on that rare occasion. I highly doubt you're going to have as many as 19 authors, but you might have, 3, 4, maybe even 5. And then again, after the authors, from, everything else is still the same, right? So you just plug your information into the formula where it goes. All right. You might end up with a chapter in a book, right? So especially, maybe an ebook. This actually might be more likely with an ebook, where you have a topic and a few people, a few editors have gotten together and, wanted to create this book, and they invited other authors to each write a chapter in the book. And each chapter, maybe in some way they all relate to the same general topic, but each chapter is different. And so you're only really using information from one of the chapters. You're not going to cite the whole book then. You're not going to do the entry as if you have used information from the whole book. You're going to create the entry to show that you used information from one chapter of that book, right? And so this template starts with the author, right? But this is the author of that chapter, not the names on the front cover of the book, right? The author of that chapter. And then the date of publication. And it might be that you can see a specific date of publication for that chapter, or the date of publication might be for the whole book itself. And then the title of the chapter, right? But not in italics, regular type, right? And then, oops, messed my own thing up. You'll have the word in, and then the editor's first initial, middle initial, last name, and then in parentheses, EDS for editors. Then a comma, then the title of the book. And then, if necessary, the edition of that book. And if it's the first edition, you just leave that part blank. But you do put the page range in these parentheses, the page range of that chapter, and then the publisher. So you can see the example here. The author of the chapter we looked at is this person right here, Dillard J.P. The Date of publication for either the chapter or the whole book is 2020. The title of the chapter is Currents in the Study of Persuasion. And look, again, only the first word is capitalized, right? In M.B. Oliver, A.A. Rainey, and J. Bryant, editors, EDS, right? So these three people are the editors of this book. The title of the book is Media Effects, Advances in Research, in Theory and Research. And again, look, the first word is capitalized, but then we have punctuation again, so then this one gets capitalized also, but none of the other words are capitalized, right? And then in the parentheses here, we have that it's the 4th edition, and the pages of that chapter are 115 to 129. The publisher is Routledge, right? So again, it's just plugging the information into the template. Same thing if you have an ebook. The only thing that changes is you put the URL at the end of the entry. Okay. Journal article. Journal article is typically something that would be peer reviewed or is a little more on the academic side, not a magazine, right? A journal. So look at this, the template, the formula. Author's last name, first initial, middle initial. That sounds familiar. Date of publication. That also sounds familiar. The title of the article in regular type. The title of the journal and the volume number in italics. The issue number in regular type in parentheses. And then the page range, followed by a period. So here's our example. We have Grady J.S., Her M., Moreno G., Perez C., and Jelinek J. Those are our authors, right? Here's our date of publication, 2019. The title of this article is Emotions in Storybooks, a comparison of storybooks that represent ethnic racial groups in the United States. That's a mouthful, but that's the title. The title of the journal that this article was found in is Psychology of Popular Media Culture. It is in volume 8, issue 3, and it spans pages 207 to 217. So again, we just plug the information into the formula. If it's an online journal article, then you end the entry with the URL or DOI. And again, if it's a journal article with a DOI, a digital object identifier, you'll know. It'll make it pretty clear, usually up at the top near the title. All right? So again, just plugging the information in, and this template looks awfully similar to what we had for the books. Little different because, you know, if it's a journal, it's likely going to have a volume number or an issue number or both. If you don't have a volume number, then you leave that part blank. If you don't have an issue number, you leave that part blank. Right? If there's no issue number given, then there's no parentheses here. You just skip from the volume number to the page range. If the page range isn't known, then you leave that part blank. But if it's a journal article, there should be a page range. If it's a good journal, there should be a volume number and an issue number. But if you really think that any of this information isn't present, then you leave it blank. But look for it pretty thoroughly first before you just assume that there's no volume number or no issue number or no page range. Look closely to make sure that you're not missing it somewhere. But if you really feel like you have searched thoroughly and you can't find any of these items or some of these items, you just leave that part blank. You just pretend like it's not even there. Skip over that part of the formula. Okay? All right. Newspaper article. Again, look, the template. author's last name, first initial, middle initial, date of publication, title of article in regular type, title of the newspaper in italics, and then the page numbers that the article was found on. Here's our example. Harlan C. is our author. The date of publication, 2013, April 2nd. This is one of those instances where you're going to have more than just the year, because a newspaper article newspapers are printed so regularly that you need to know more than just the year, right? To be able to tell your reader where this article is found. The title of the article is North Korea Vows to Restart Shuttered Nuclear Reactor That Can Make Bomb-Grade Plutonium. The title of the newspaper is The Washington Post. And the page numbers that this article was found on was page A1 and A4. So it's one of those articles that starts on one page and then is continued on another page further on in the newspaper, right? And if it's an online newspaper, then instead of page numbers at the end, you would simply give the full URL. So here you can see, author, date of publication, title of the article, title of the newspaper, but instead of page range, we get the full URL right here, right? Now, one note about newspaper articles, about looking at this type of entry. This type of entry should be used for articles that come from an actual newspaper, whether it's print or online. So like an online news site that provides news but doesn't actually publish any kind of newspaper, that gets a different format that we'll look at later. This type of format is for actual newspapers, print or online. Keep that in mind. All right, so a blog post. You want to make sure that whoever the author or organization is that is doing the blog is credible. You don't want to just come across some Joe Schmo's blog and use them as a credible source necessarily, but there are a lot of organizations, a lot of companies, a lot of businesses that on their websites have a blog. And it is very possible to find credible information in those blogs, right? So this would be the template for that. Author's last name, first initial, middle initial, date of publication or posting, title of the blog post, and then title of the blog or the name of the organization. Sometimes you're not going to find the blog itself won't have a name. Like you'll just be on the website and there'll be a link that just says blog and you click on it and there's no title of the blog. Then it just gives you the most recent posts. In that case, it's the organization or the business, the website business that you would put instead of the title of the blog. And then the full URL. And you can see here where we've simply plugged in our information, author of the blog, date of posting, title of the blog post, title of the blog, or perhaps this is the company or the business, and then the full URL for that blog post. So YouTube video, you're going to start it with the name of the account. Because it's YouTube, the author won't necessarily be a person's name, and it's not an organization, it's just the name of the account. And you can see under the YouTube video what the account is that posted it. So the name of the account, and then in parentheses, the date that the video was uploaded. And then in italics, the title of the video with the word video in brackets after that. Then YouTube, and then the full URL for that particular video. So here we have our example. The account holder for this video that we're looking at is Asian Boss. The video was uploaded on June 5th, 2020. The title of the video is World's Leading Vaccine Expert Fact Checks COVID-19 vaccine conspiracy, stay curious, number 22, brackets, video, YouTube, and then the full URL for that video. Just plug in the information. This one here is for a page on a news website. So this would be sort of like, the example here is the Huffington Post. The Huffington Post is a news site, but they don't have a newspaper that they publish in print or online. They're just a news site. So you would have the author's last name, first initial, middle initial, date of publication, the title of the article, or the title of that section, or the title of that page. It just depends on what type of news source. If it's truly a good news site, it'll be the title of the article. Because even though it's not a publication, it's not a newspaper, it's still, sort of like an article. And then that's in italics. And then the name of the news website, not in italics. And then the full URL, right? So you can see here where we've just plugged in the information, right? Author, date of publication, and we know this one gave us an exact date, so we include it. In italics, the title of this article, right? Why some people with anxiety love watching horror movies. The title of the news website, HuffPost, and then the full URL of that article, right? Page on a website with a government agency group author. So here we're looking at the author's last name, first initial, middle initial, but in this case, it's not a person, it's a government agency or an organization. So in this case, we put National Institute of Mental Health. That is the organization that published or wrote the article that we're looking at, or the website, the page that we're looking at, right? Date of publication, title of the article, in italics, anxiety disorders, title of the agency, full title, not in italics, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health, and then the full URL. Now, if by chance there was an actual person's name associated with this article, then you would use their actual name. But if you're looking at a government agency or something like that, more than likely there's not going to be an individual author, in which case you'd use the agency or organization's name. All right. So this would be the organizational group author, very much like the government agency that we just looked at. So you can see World Health Organization, date, title of the article, full URL. We didn't have to put, so you remember back up here in this one, this was the National Institute of Mental Health. We put them as the author. And then here in the entry, we typed out the full agency name, right? In this case, the agency is the author. We don't need to repeat that information. So it only goes here in the author spot. And then we just have the date and the title and the URL. We don't have to put the name of the organization again after the title. They're already there. All right. So a web page on a website with an individual author. So this is not a news site. This is not an article. This would be something, like on WebMD, if there happened to be an author on the section you're looking at. Any other kind of website that's not news or journal, right? So we have, again, author's information, date of publication, title of the article or that page of the website, and then the name of the website and the full URL. So our example here, the author is F. Giovanetti. This section was published on November 16th, 2019. This page of the website, this section of the website. The title is why we are so obsessed with personality types, right? That's the title of this page or section we're looking at. The website that we found it on is Medium. And then this is the full URL for that section of the website. Notice that we didn't just put medium.com and end it, because that's not going to take us to why we are so obsessed with personality types. Typing in just https://medium.com, that's only going to take us to Medium's homepage. But we want our reader to be able to get to that exact spot on medium.com. That's why we have to put the full URL, right? Also, keep in mind when we start working with websites and web pages that the date of publication is not the same as the date that it was last reviewed. Don't use the reviewed date. If you can't find the date of publication, there's a way to note that. And we're going to look at that here in just a second. If you're looking at a page on a website, sometimes it's required to include the retrieval date, meaning the date you looked at that website. And that would be when if you're looking at a website or a section of a website where the information is likely to change on a regular basis, then you want to indicate the retrieval date to let your reader know how long ago you looked at that website, right? And you can see here, you just do it right before the URL, retrieve January 9, 2020 from. It's not super common that you would need to use the retrieval date for one of your entries, but it is possible. If you're not sure, contact me. Reach out to me and we'll figure out if it's the type of source that is likely to change on a regular basis, or if it's pretty static, which means you wouldn't need the retrieval date. All right. Now we have a page on a website with no author. What if there's no author and it's not an organization either? Well, then the formula changes a little. We don't have an author to put at the beginning. So instead, we start the entry with the title of that article or of that section of the website, the date of publication, the name of the website, and then the full URL. So our example here, we have this article, All 33 Chili Miners Freed in Flawless Rescue. It was published on October 13, 2010. The website that we found it on is MSN, and this is the full URL for that specific article. There was no author given for it. And MSN, that's the website. That's not an organization, the same as like World Health Organization or American Psychological Association. That's just the name, that's just the company of the website. You're not going to put them as the author. So in this case, we start the entry with the title of that page or section, right? Also, keep in mind the note there, saying that the source has an anonymous author is not the same as saying it has no author. You only use anonymous if it's literally signed anonymous, right? You don't just say anonymous simply because the author's name isn't there. So keep that in mind. Now we have a page on a website with no date. So we have the author's name still, but we don't have a date of publication. So what do we do then? Well, in the parentheses where the date should normally go, we put lowercase n period, lowercase d period. Basically stands for no date. All right, so our example here, so here's our author. We don't have a date of publication. We have the title of the article. Oops, switched again. The title of the article, or section, the website, the full URL. What if you have a page on a website with no author and no date? Well, you go back to the formula for a website with no author, which means we start with the title of the article or section that we're looking at. We still use the same format for date of publication as we did for our first example. So in period D period, and then the name of the website and the full URL. So in this case, we were looking at the section on neurology. There's no date given. We were looking at it on Wikipedia, and here is the full URL for that section on Wikipedia. Right? Let's just plug it in. All right, so there's a lot of examples to go through. I hope you can I hope it got a little repetitive for you, honestly, because if it started to get repetitive, that means you're starting to pick up on the fact that a lot of those entries were super similar. And if you started sort of knowing what I was going to do before I even said it, or what I was going to say, how to fill in the template, how to fill in the formula, then that means you're catching on to that as well. And that's good. Now, you're not expected to memorize any of that stuff, right? Except just that basic set of information you're going to need for almost every type of source out there. If it has an author, you're going to need that information. Date of publication, you're going to need it. Titles, you're going to need it. URLs, you're going to need them, right? Now, where to place it all, you don't have to memorize that. That's what the templates are for. And you don't have to come just here to this PowerPoint to see those templates, to see those formulas. There are all kinds of resources out there for you that will show you how to plug in the information in the correct spots. One easy way that you can help yourself, or that students will help themselves, are Citation Makers. These are websites designed for helping you create your reference entry and citation for a particular source. Two very common ones are Citation Machine and EasyBid, the two that I've listed here. Now, if you have a really standard source that doesn't have anything wonky or weird about it, these types of websites can help you. There's two ways that they function. One way is you literally manually type in the information. It will ask you, who's the author? And you type that in. When was it published? And you type that in. What's the title? You type that in. Blah, blah, blah. And then when, once you're done, you hit sort of, like create, and it will spit out the reference entry based on the information you plugged in. You can also, if it's an online source, you can copy and paste the full URL and then hit create, and it will go, internally go to that website, go to that URL and find the information itself, and then spit out the reference entry for you. That's where things can get a little tricky, because these citation making websites aren't super smart. And certain websites and web pages can totally mess them up. And if, for instance, if you're dealing with a page on a website that doesn't have an author, but yet for some reason a name is located in the near vicinity of the top of the page, then it's going to think that that person is the author, and it's not. So that's why I say use with caution. Use with caution. Especially if you're still getting the hang of all of this, even though it seems like a really easy, simple, stress-free way to create these entries and figure out your citations. If you're not real sure of what you're doing yet that can actually mess you up. Another fairly helpful and reliable website is the Purdue Online Writing Lab. All right, so we're going to look at first the Purdue Online Writing Lab, and then we're going to look at apa.org, right? So let us stop sharing this, and we're going to reshare. All right, go to my browser. All right, so here I've just Googled Purdue OWL Online Writing Lab. You can see it's the first example that comes up, or the first result. And they even have, they're showing me the most common sections of this website, and one of them is APA. Another one is research and citation. All right, so let's go, let's see what APA. Okay, we got a whole lot of information here. Research and citation resources, conducting research, using research, the APA style 7th edition, that's good, it's using the most current edition. APA style introduction, overview and workshop, formatting and style guide, that's what we want. So general format, in-text citations, the basics, oh, reference list. Okay, basic rules, reference list for, if you have just one author versus more than one author, articles and periodicals, books, other print sources. So everything right here is just about print sources, and then we have electronic sources, then audio-visual media, and other non-print sources, right? So we look here at books, right? It shows us the template right here, okay? And then it shows us an example. If we have an edited book with no author, here's our template, here's our example, right? An edited book with an author or more than one author, template, example. This is if you're using a chapter from the edited book. A translation, something that is more beyond the first edition. A multi-volume work, right? That gives us all kinds of templates and examples for different types of books. We have other print sources, right? So an entry in a dictionary, thesaurus, or encyclopedia with a group author, entry in a dictionary, thesaurus, or encyclopedia with an individual author. So a work discussed in a secondary source, it's not. See, dissertation or abstract, dissertation or master's thesis. Very rarely are you going to end up using any of these, right? Let's look back up here at articles and periodicals. Again, these are print sources. These are if you're able to hold the book in your hand or hold the journal in your hand, right? So an article in a print journal or an article in an electronic journal. It gives you that. I think it did under there too, right? So it's good. It gives you both. It's been a while since I've been to the Purdue OWL. I go mostly to APA, which we're going to look at in just a second. But you can see, it gives you the example, article in a magazine, shows you article in a newspaper, a review. Come back over here. Let's look at electronic sources. There we have a web page or a piece of online content, right? So it gives you the template, just like I had on the PowerPoint slides, and an example. If it's a group, if it's an organization, right? Template, example, right? If the page's author is not listed, start with the title instead, right? So title of the page gives you the template, gives you an example. So this is a really, good place to come to as well. Audio visual media, right? Film or video, a TV series, just an episode from a TV series, a YouTube video, a music album, a single song or track, a podcast, right? This gives you the same kind of information that I was giving you in the PowerPoint. You just have to sort of use this left-hand menu over here to figure out where you need to go, right? Other non-print sources, interviews. Hey, some of you might do an interview for your research paper. A presentation at a conference without an online source, with an online source. Let's see. Personal communication, like if you emailed someone, using that, or like just a conversation, right? And you have all these other sources here, like a sample paper. Up here, it gives you sort of all of the basics of APA format. Really cool thing about the Purdue Online Writing Lab is it actually is a writing lab. And if you go like right here, you can actually get help with all parts of the writing process. Like even if it's not a research paper, you can find resources on how to write an introductory paragraph in a thesis statement. Right? But it is also a pretty solid place to get questions answered about APA format. You just have to sort of use this menu over here to make sure you're going to the right place to get the right information. But if you're dealing with an article in a periodical, you come here and it's going to show you the template, show you the example, and you just plug in your information. Notice too that up here it says cite your source automatically in APA. And, if you're looking at a website, if your source is on a website, you can paste the URL here and then hit cite. That's going to take you to one of those citation making machines that I had listed on the PowerPoint. So even though Purdue has it here, I still say use it with caution until you feel more comfortable with basic reference entry formulas. All right. The other website that I suggest going to is apa.org. Why not go straight to the people who create APA format? So I Googled apa.org, first search result, and again, they give me a bunch of the major sections on the website. I'm just going to go straight to APA style. All right, so we have a lot of information here. Scroll down a little bit, right? Popular style guidelines, reference examples, title page setup, paper format, bias-free language, in-text citations, sample papers. These are the people who create APA format. Go to them for your answers. Go here, since we're talking about reference pages and reference entries though, let's go to reference examples. All right, so we have Textual Works, data sets you probably don't need, audio-visual media, online media, right? Let's go to Textual Works, okay? Periodicals, books and reference works, edited book chapters and entries in reference works, reports and gray literature, conference presentations and proceedings, dissertations and theses, unpublished and informally published works, right? But look, under periodicals, journal article reference, magazine article reference, newspaper article, blog post and blog comment. Here we have book and ebook, religious works, chapter in an edited book, dictionary, Wikipedia. If I were to click on journal article references, we have just your standard journal article entry, one with an article number. What if you have some missing information? What if it's a retracted article? You're probably just going to need just plain journal article. And you're probably going to recognize some of this stuff because I used these examples in the PowerPoint slides. This is where I got all the information for the PowerPoint, was from apa.org, because what better place to go than the people who create it? So going back, right, these were textual works. Scroll back up here, audio-visual media, right? So here we have artwork, right? The clip art, film and television, podcast, PowerPoint slide or lecture notes, TED Talk, YouTube video, right? Click on YouTube video. It's going to show us how to do that entry. It doesn't give us the templates though. It just gives us examples. There's another section of this website where you can sort of get a template, but it's not as visually clear what the template actually is. It sort of assumes that you already have a pretty good understanding of those basic formulas for source entries. So if you don't really have that basic understanding yet, the chart that it shows you can be pretty confusing. But you can kind of figure this out, right? We know Asian Boss is probably the people that created the video. This, we're looking at a YouTube video, so this is probably when it was posted. This is pretty long, so it's probably the name of the video. And then we can see that we're supposed to have the word video in brackets there. Oh yeah, we can see that here's the website, YouTube, right? And then the full URL for the video. So even though it doesn't give you the templates, hopefully after having gone through the PowerPoint with me, you can kind of figure out what each section of the formula is. Online media, here we have, Facebook, Instagram, all the social media, web page on a website, right? So that's where, if it's a news website, if it's a government agency website, if it's an organization website, if it's just a random website that, with an author, without an author, with a date of publication, without a date of publication, all the stuff that I showed you in the PowerPoint. Come back here to apa.org, and you can get all that information here as well, plus additional types of sources that I did not include on the PowerPoint. But just remember that basic information and those basic formulas, right? There's also a function in Microsoft Word that allows you to create reference entries. If you are interested in learning about that, reach out to me and I can set up an individual Zoom meeting with you and we can go through it together. There's also tons of YouTube videos that explain how to do it. But since not everyone works in Microsoft Word, I didn't want to take up time in this video to show you, but it is there as an option. And again, if you know what information you're supposed to have, and you just plug it in the right way, Microsoft Word will create the entry for you. And it's pretty solid as long as you are putting in the right information. Okay. So we have some practice slides here and we're going to create the entries. Now, I'm only going to do a few, right? But here we have a book, right? A book that has only one author. The book is titled Psych. The author is A. Spencer Rathis. It was published by Cengage Learning in 2015. So here's our template, right? So let me just come here. Author's last name, Rathis, right? Comma, first initial A, period, middle initial S, period. What's our date of publication? I need a parenthesis first. Oh, it was 2015, right? Close the parenthesis. And then I need a period after that. And then I'm going to need to be in italics to type the title. And the title is Psych, right? P-S-Y-C-H. And then make sure I get out of my italics because nothing else should be in italics. And then a period. And then what comes next? I don't have any information about what edition it is. Oh, then the publisher. engaged learning, period. That's the entry. Just plug in the information. Okay. Oh, here we have a book that has 2 authors. Okay. So I still want you big. Let me keep that last. All right. So author's last name. Published by Bedford St. Martin's in 2016. The book was written by Nancy Summers and Diane Hacker and is titled A Pocket Style Manual. All right, so author's last name. Let's see, Nancy Summers is listed first. So SONNERS in ampersand, right? And Hacker, D, right? Yep, Anna Hacker. What's our date of publication? Oh, 2016. It goes in the parentheses with a period after it. And then our title in italics. Our title was A Pocket Style Manual. Out of italics, so I don't make any mistakes. Period. And then what comes next? I don't have any information about what edition this is, so we skip it. And then the publisher, it was Bedford. I misspelled that in my original. St. Martin's. That's the entry. All right. Let's see. We have an online journal article with 1 author. All right. The URL is that right there. This part right here. The name of the journal is Life Science. The author is C. Wanjak. The title of the article is Secondhand Smoke Kills 42,000 Non-Smokers a Year in U.S., published on September 28th, 2012. All right. So, author's last name, Wanjek, comma, first initial is C, period. There are parentheses for date of publication, 2012, September, 28th. Close out my parentheses, period. Title of the article, not in italics. All right, so second hand, remember, only the first word gets capitalized. Or if there is punctuation in the middle, like a colon, then the word after the colon would also get capitalized. We don't have any colons in this article title, though. So secondhand smoke kills 42,000 non-smokers a year in U.S. gets capitalized because it's a proper noun. All right, so after the title, the article is a period. And then we want the title of the journal in italics. It was Life Science. Right? Volume number. This doesn't tell me anything about a volume number. Issue number. Nope. There's no page range. So we go straight. I'm going to go out of my italics since I don't have any other information to put in there. Put a period and then the full URL. I'm just going to copy this even though the font is going to be crazy different. Sorry, is that right? There you go. That's our entry. Just plug in the information. Right. I think, let's see, that was a journal article with multiple authors, but I think you guys get the idea there. Let's do the YouTube video. So the video is uploaded on August 7th, 2020. It's titled Formatting an APA Style Reference List. The account holder is AskASC, and there's the URL. So looking at my template, I do the name of the account first. That was AskASC. And then in my parentheses, the date it was uploaded, so 2020, August 7, period. Then the title of the video in italics. That title was Formatting an APA Style Reference List. Get out of my italics. In brackets, I'm going to have the word video. Close up the bracket, then a period, then YouTube, and then the full URL. There you go. Just plug in the information. Also, an information from a website with an author. Right? So let's look at this. A section from WebMD. We have the URL. The title of the section is The Best Cities for Allergies in the U.S., and it's written by Kathleen Doheny. So we have an author, so we're going to put her last name, Doheny, comma, K. The date of publication. We're not told anything about the date of publication. So that must mean there is no date. So what do we put in our parentheses? In period D, period. Close out our parentheses, put a period. Title of the article, section, page number in italics. That was The Best Cities for Allergies in the U.S. Finish up my italics. Period. Name of the website. That was WebMD, right? And then the full URL. There you go. Our last one. Information from a website without an author. So this source was accessed on Wikipedia. We have the URL. The article is a poem called Footprints. There's no known author or date of publication. So we're going to start with the title of the article or section. In this case, it's the title of the poem. And that's okay. So Footprints. Date of publication, don't know. So N period D period. Close out my parentheses, put a period. Name of the website. Wikipedia, full URL. There you go. It really is just plugging the information into the formula. So remember, you don't have to memorize how to format reference entries. Simply remember that there are resources you can go to and refer to for help and examples. Remember that creating the proper entry is only half the battle. You'll also need to create the references page in proper APA format. So let's take a look at that. So let's just pretend that we had done all of those sources, all those practice slides, and we have our entries for them. This is how our reference page would look. References titled there. We have all 7 sources in alphabetical order according to the first word of the entry. Sometimes the first word, most of the time, the first word is an author's last name. But other times, we have the content publisher or the channel owner. In this case, it's a YouTube video. Sometimes it's the section of the website we're in because there was no author. So this is what our reference page would look like for those 7 sources that were in the practice slides. It would look like this. when you're first creating the entries, don't worry about having them listed in the correct order. Just list them as you create them, right? As you find a source and you're like, yes, I know I'm going to use information from this, create the entry, put it on the list. Next source you decide to use information from, create the entry, put it next on the list. Once you actually get the essay drafted, then you can go back to that reference list and move them around and put them in the correct order, right? All right, so I'm going to go right back here to our last remember. Once you create the proper reference entry for a source, you're going to know everything you need to know to create the proper citation for that source. And that will be in the next lesson. All right? Thanks for hanging in there. I hope this was helpful. I know it was a lot to take in, super long video, but students have asked for something like this in the past. This is the most in-depth I've ever gone. Hopefully it has been beneficial to you. If you have any questions though, please reach out to me. I can do another one-on-one Zoom with you, or maybe a small group if several of you are interested in doing something live where you can ask me questions, right then and there. But just remember, you also have other resources available to you as well. But I am here. If you need anything, have any specific questions, please let me know. Otherwise, go ahead and move on to the next lesson on citations.